Welcome back to the Wilderness Protocol. The envelope contained 3 items. A photograph, $20, 000 in cash, and a Vatican City postmark from yesterday. I sat my coffee down and studied the photo. A man in his 30s with brown hair and a crooked smile stood outside what looked like a diner in Phoenix. He wore a mechanic's uniform with Trevor stitched on the pocket. Nothing about him screamed danger or importance. Just another guy trying to make it through another day. The return address read Office of Private Correspondence. But I knew better. 3 months earlier, I completed a job in Milan that had papal fingerprints all over it. A corrupt banker who'd been skimming from charitable donations. Clean, quiet, and the client had paid triple my usual rate without negotiation. This felt like a follow-up call. I opened my laptop and ran Trevor's face through the recognition software I'd acquired from a former NSA contact. Within minutes, I had his full name. Trevor Martin Castellano, 32 years old, divorced, no children, worked at Murphy's Auto Repair on East Van Buren Street. Clean record except for a DUI from college. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that would typically warrant my services. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Café Russo, Vatican City, Thursday, 2 p.m. Come alone. Bring the materials. I deleted the message and booked a flight to Rome. 3 days later, I sat across from a man who introduced himself as Monsignor Adalbert Kowalski. He had the soft hands of someone who'd never done manual labor, and eyes that had seen too much forgiveness extended to people who didn't deserve it. We were the only customers in the small cafe, and I noticed the owner had conveniently stepped out for a cigarette break that was lasting longer than usual. The photograph shows Trevor Castellano. I said, cutting straight to business. What's his crime? Kowalski stirred sugar into his espresso with deliberate slowness. His existence. I don't kill people for existing, even when that existence threatens the stability of the Catholic Church. I leaned back in my chair. This was bigger than a corrupt banker. Explain. Trevor Castellano is the biological son of His Holiness Pope Francis Xavier. The words hung in the air between us like incense smoke. I kept my expression neutral, but my mind raced through the implications. A pope with a son would be a scandal that could topple the Vatican's credibility worldwide. You're telling me the pope had a child before taking vows? No. Kowalski said quietly. I'm telling you he had a child 15 years into his papacy. That changed everything. This wasn't about youthful indiscretion before religious commitment. This was about active betrayal of sacred vows while leading the world's largest religious organization. How do you know? Kowalski reached into his briefcase and produced a manila folder. Inside were DNA test results, hospital records, and what appeared to be correspondence between the Pope and a woman named Diane Castellano. Diane worked as a translator for Vatican documents from 2010 to 2012. He explained she was brilliant, beautiful, and unfortunately she caught His Holiness during a period of spiritual crisis. Their relationship lasted 8 months. I scanned the documents. Everything looked legitimate from the DNA comparisons to the medical records showing Diane's pregnancy and Trevor's birth. Where's Diane now? Ovarian cancer took her 2 years ago. She never told Trevor about his father's true identity. As far as he knows, his father was some Italian businessman who abandoned the family. Then why is this a problem? If Trevor doesn't know and his mother is dead, who's going to expose this? Kowalski pulled out another document. This one was a letter written in careful handwriting. 3 weeks ago, Trevor received this in the mail. It's from his mother. She left instructions with her lawyer to deliver it on Trevor's 32nd birthday, which was last month. I read the letter. Diane had told her son everything. The Pope's real name before his religious career, where they met, when their relationship occurred, and how she'd hidden the truth to protect both Trevor and his father's position. The letter also contained this. Kowalski said, producing a gold ring with an intricate Vatican seal. A gift from His Holiness to Diane during their relationship. Trevor now possesses physical evidence that could be matched to the Pope's personal collection. The pieces fell into place. Trevor wasn't just a potential scandal anymore. He was a walking, breathing threat to the Pope's legitimacy and the Church's moral authority. Has Trevor made any moves to contact the Vatican? Not yet. But our intelligence suggests he's been asking questions about Vatican procedures for requesting audiences with His Holiness. He's also been researching papal succession and church law regarding celibacy. I closed the folder. And the Pope wants his own son dead to prevent exposure. The Holy Father is facing the most difficult decision of his spiritual life. Kowalski corrected. He sees no alternative that preserves the faith of over 1 billion Catholics worldwide. There are alternatives. Pay Trevor off. Relocate him. Give him a new identity. We considered those options. However, His Holiness believes that allowing this secret to exist, even contained, would compromise his ability to lead with moral authority. He views this as a test of his commitment to the Church above all personal desires. I studied Kowalski's face. The man genuinely believed he was helping to preserve something sacred, not orchestrate a murder. What makes you think Trevor will go public? His employment records show he's facing significant financial difficulties. His ex-wife has been pressing for higher alimony payments, and his mother's medical bills left substantial debt. A man in his position might see this information as his lottery ticket. Or he might just want to meet his father. That possibility troubles His Holiness even more than public exposure. The emotional complications of such a meeting could lead to decisions that compromise the papacy's integrity. I finished my espresso and considered the offer. $50. 000 for a single target. Plus all expenses paid. The money was substantial. But something about the job felt wrong beyond the obvious moral complexities. I need to see him first. I said finally. Watch his behavior. Understand his intentions. If Trevor Castellano is planning to blackmail the Vatican or cause a scandal, that's one thing. But if he's just a guy who wants to understand his heritage, killing him becomes something else entirely. Kowalski nodded. His Holiness expected you might require additional verification. You have 1 week to conduct your assessment. After that, the decision must be made. And if I determine Trevor isn't a threat, then you will be compensated for your time and the matter will be handled through other means. We both knew what other means implied. If I walked away, they'd find someone with fewer scruples and less professional discretion. I'll need clean documentation to enter the United States and operate freely. Already prepared. Kowalski handed me a passport and driver's license under the name W.D.E. Morrison, complete with credit cards and a backstory as a freelance security consultant. One final question, I said. Pocketing the documents. How does the Pope live with himself? Ordering his son's death. Kowalski's expression grew distant. His Holiness spends 12 hours daily in prayer, asking for guidance and forgiveness. He believes God will judge him for this decision, but that the alternative would cause harm to millions of faithful Catholics who depend on the Church's moral leadership. And you? How do you sleep at night? I serve the Church, not my own conscience. He replied, sometimes preservation of faith requires actions that individual morality cannot easily justify. I left the cafe with a new passport, a clear mission, and the uncomfortable knowledge that I was about to determine whether a man lived or died based on his intentions toward a father he'd never known. The flight to Phoenix gave me time to plan my approach. I need to get close to Trevor, understand his personality, and gauge whether he represented a genuine threat to Vatican stability or simply a confused man seeking family connection. By the time we landed, I decided on my cover story. Wade Morrison, security systems consultant, new to Phoenix and looking for an honest mechanic to service his rental car. It would give me legitimate reasons to visit Murphy's Auto Repair multiple times and observe Trevor's behavior patterns. The rental agency gave me a reliable sedan that looked appropriately businesslike. I drove to a hotel near Trevor's workplace and checked in for an indefinite stay. That evening, I positioned myself across the street from Murphy's Auto Repair and watched Trevor finish his shift. He moved with the confident efficiency of someone who understood his craft, taking time to explain repair procedures to customers and double-checking his work before declaring jobs complete. Nothing about his demeanor suggested a man planning extortion or scandal. He seemed genuinely focused on providing good service and earning honest wages. At 6:15 p.m., Trevor locked up the shop and walked to a red pickup truck that had seen better decades. I followed him to a small apartment complex on the south side of Phoenix, maintaining careful distance to avoid detection. The building looked like it had been constructed in the 1970s and forgotten about shortly thereafter. Trevor's apartment was on the second floor, accessible by an external staircase that creaked under his weight. I parked across the street and observed his evening routine through the partially open blinds. He heated a frozen dinner, cracked open a beer, and settled in front of a television showing a baseball game. For 30 minutes, he looked like any other working-class American trying to unwind after a long day. Then he opened his mother's letter and read it again. I watched his expression change as he processed the words for what was probably the 100th time since receiving it. This wasn't the face of a man planning blackmail or public exposure. This was someone struggling to understand how his entire life story had been rewritten by a single piece of paper. Trevor set the letter aside and picked up the gold ring his mother had left him. He held it up to the light, examining the Vatican seal with the curiosity of someone trying to connect abstract concepts to tangible reality. He wasn't plotting. He was grieving and confused. The next morning, I visited Murphy's Auto Repair with my fabricated car trouble story. Trevor greeted me with genuine politeness and immediately began diagnosing the non-existent problem I'd described. "Sounds like your transmission might be slipping," he said, popping the hood. "When did you first notice the issue?" "Yesterday evening, driving back from dinner." I lied smoothly. "I'm new to Phoenix, still learning my way around. Friend of mine recommended your shop." "Well, let's take a look and see what we're dealing with." Trevor spent 20 minutes thoroughly examining components that were functioning perfectly, displaying the kind of professional integrity that couldn't be faked. When he found nothing wrong, he didn't try to invent problems or oversell unnecessary services. "Everything looks good under here," he reported. "Maybe you hit a rough patch of road that felt worse than it was. These rental cars can feel different from what you're used to driving. What do I owe you for the inspection?" "Nothing. Didn't take but a few minutes. And I didn't find anything that needed fixing." I thanked him and drove away, but returned 2 hours later with a legitimate request for an oil change. This gave me opportunity to observe Trevor interacting with other customers and his coworkers. Every interaction reinforced my initial assessment. Trevor Castiano was a decent man trying to make an honest living despite financial pressures and personal confusion about his recent family revelations. During my third visit that week, this time requesting tire rotation, I steered our conversation toward more personal topics. "You seem like you've got a good handle on this business," I commented. "Ever think about opening your own shop?" Trevor laughed, but not with humor. "I think about a lot of things I can't afford to do. Tough times. My ex-wife's lawyer seems to think I'm hiding money somewhere. Medical bills from my mom's cancer treatment didn't help either." He tightened the lug nuts on my front wheel with more force than necessary. "Some days I wonder what life would have been like if my dad had stuck around. He left when you were young. Never met him. Mom always said he was some Italian businessman who wasn't ready for family responsibilities." Trevor paused his work and looked at me directly. Found out recently that story might not have been completely accurate. This was the opening I needed. How so? Got a letter from her after she passed away. Turns out there was more to the story than she let on. That must be difficult to process. Yeah. It is. Makes me wonder about a lot of things I thought I knew about myself. I waited for him to elaborate, but Trevor returned his attention to the tire rotation. Whatever internal struggle he was facing, he wasn't ready to share details with a customer he'd met 3 days ago. That evening, I composed my preliminary report for Monsignor Kowalski. Subject shows no indication of planning extortion or public exposure. Primary concerns appear to be financial stress and curiosity about paternal identity. Behavior patterns suggest individuals seeking family connection rather than monetary gain or revenge. Recommend continued observation before making final determination. I encrypted the message and sent it through secure channels. Then settled in for what I hoped would be a short-term surveillance assignment. Trevor Castiano might be the Pope's son, but he was also a good man facing an impossible situation. The question was whether that would be enough to save his life. 3 days later, Trevor made the decision that would determine his fate. I was conducting routine surveillance from my usual spot across the street when I saw him emerge from his apartment carrying a small duffel bag. Instead of heading to work, he walked to his pickup truck and drove toward the airport. My blood turned to ice water. This wasn't the behavior of a man content to let sleeping dogs lie. I followed at a safe distance, watching as Trevor parked in long-term parking and entered the terminal. A quick check of departure boards showed flights to Rome, New York, and Los Angeles, leaving within the next 2 hours. Trevor approached the counter for the Rome flight. I called Kowalski immediately. He's making his move, I reported. Booking passage to Rome as we speak. Are you certain? I'm watching him buy the ticket right now. There was a long pause on the other end. His Holiness will be deeply saddened but not surprised. How do you wish to proceed? I can handle this quietly at the airport. Make it look like a medical emergency. No, Kowalski said firmly. His Holiness specifically requested that if Trevor chose to pursue contact, the matter should be handled in Rome. He believes the city where this began should be where it ends. That's exponentially more complicated. Your compensation will be increased accordingly. $100. 000 upon completion. I watched Trevor disappear into the security checkpoint. I'll be on the next available flight. There will be someone waiting for you at Leonardo da Vinci Airport. Ask for Father Benedetto at the information desk. The connection ended and I hurried to book my own passage to Rome. During the long flight, I found myself thinking about Trevor's expression as he'd purchased his ticket. There had been determination there, but also fear. This wasn't a man excited about potential wealth or revenge. This looked like someone who'd finally worked up the courage to seek answers about his identity. The realization made what I had to do significantly more difficult. Father Benedetto turned out to be a thin man in his 60s with kind eyes and nervous hands. He met me at baggage claim carrying a sign with Morrison Security written in careful English. Welcome to Rome, Mr. Morrison, he said quietly. I trust your flight was comfortable. Adequate. What's the current situation? Mr. Castiano arrived 4 hours ago. He checked into a hotel near the Colosseum and has been walking around the city, apparently sightseeing. No attempts to contact the Vatican have been detected. Maybe he's working up his nerve. Perhaps. Or maybe he simply wanted to see Rome before making any decisions. We walked to Father Benedetto's car. A modest sedan that looked like it had survived several papal administrations. His Holiness has requested a final meeting with you before any action is taken, Benedetto said as we drove through Roman traffic. He wishes to discuss the matter personally. That's highly irregular. Yes, but these are irregular circumstances. 20 minutes later, I found myself in a private chamber within Vatican City, waiting for an audience with the leader of the Catholic Church. The room was smaller than I'd expected, furnished simply with a wooden desk, 2 chairs, and a crucifix on the wall. When Pope Francis Xavier entered, I was struck by how ordinary he appeared. Medium height, gray hair, lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. He could have been any grandfather dealing with family problems, except that his family problems could destabilize world religion. "Please sit," he said in accented English, gesturing to one of the chairs. "I appreciate you taking time for this conversation. Your Holiness, I want you to understand that what I'm asking you to do goes against every paternal instinct I possess." He began without preamble. "Trevor is my son, and despite the circumstances of his conception, I have thought about him every day for 32 years. Then why proceed with this course of action?" The Pope was quiet for a long moment, staring at the crucifix on the wall. "Do you have children, Mr. Morrison?" "No." "Then perhaps you cannot fully understand the weight of choosing between one child and the spiritual welfare of millions of other children around the world." He turned his attention back to me. "If my relationship with Trevor's mother becomes public knowledge, it will not simply be a scandal for me personally. It will undermine the moral authority that allows the Church to provide guidance, comfort, and hope to over 1 billion people. Trevor might not want to expose the relationship. He might just want to meet his father. I have considered that possibility extensively. But even a private relationship carries enormous risk. How long before someone notices the Pope spending time with a young American man? How long before investigators begin asking questions about that man's background and parentage? The truth would eventually emerge and the damage would be the same. I studied his face, looking for signs of doubt or uncertainty. Instead, I saw the resolved expression of a man who'd already made peace with an impossible choice. What about other options? Relocation, new identity, financial support. Those solutions only delay the inevitable while creating new vulnerabilities. Trevor deserves better than a life of hiding and deception. And the Church deserves leadership that isn't constantly vulnerable to exposure. So you've chosen the Church over your son. I've chosen the spiritual welfare of humanity over my personal desires. He corrected. It is perhaps the most difficult decision any father could face. But it is the decision my position requires. The Pope stood and walked to a small window overlooking St. Peter's Square. I have spent countless hours in prayer seeking guidance for this situation. Each time I am reminded that leadership sometimes demands sacrifices that seem unbearable on a personal level but serve a greater good. And if Trevor is innocent of any intention to harm, the Church intention is irrelevant. His very existence creates an untenable situation. Even with the best of intentions, relationships have consequences that cannot be controlled or predicted. I realized then that nothing I could say would change his mind. The Pope had already walked through every possible scenario and reached his conclusion through a combination of pragmatic calculation and spiritual conviction. How do you want this handled? Quietly, quickly, and in a manner that appears natural. Trevor came to Rome as a tourist. Tourists sometimes experience accidents or medical emergencies. Such things are unfortunate but not suspicious. I understand. The Pope returned to his chair and looked directly at me. I want you to know that I will carry the weight of this decision for the rest of my life. Every Mass I celebrate, every blessing I offer, every moment of spiritual guidance I provide will be shadowed by the knowledge of what I authorize to preserve the Church's integrity. Does that make it easier or harder? Neither. It simply makes it necessary. Our meeting concluded with practical arrangements. Father Benedetto would provide real-time intelligence about Trevor's location and activities. I would have 48 hours to complete the assignment before Vatican security began asking questions about the American tourist who disappeared. That evening, I positioned myself near Trevor's hotel and waited for him to emerge for dinner. When he did, I was surprised by his destination choice. Instead of tourist restaurants near his hotel, Trevor walked to a small church about 6 blocks away, San Giuseppe de Falegnami. According to the sign outside, Street Joseph of the Carpenters. I followed him inside and took a seat several rows behind where he'd chosen to sit. The church was nearly empty except for an elderly woman lighting candles near the altar and a priest preparing for evening service. For 30 minutes, Trevor simply sat in silence, staring at the crucifix above the altar. His posture suggested deep contemplation rather than casual sightseeing. When the priest began evening prayers, Trevor participated with the familiarity of someone who'd grown up attending regular services. His mother had clearly raised him in the Catholic faith, which meant he understood the magnitude of what his father's position represented. After the service, Trevor approached the priest and began what appeared to be a serious conversation. I couldn't hear their words from my position, but I could observe body language and facial expressions. Trevor showed the priest his mother's letter. The priest's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. He stepped backward, crossed himself, and began speaking rapidly in Italian while gesturing toward the letter. Trevor appeared confused by the response and tried to ask questions, but the priest hurried away toward the sacristy. I realized then that Trevor had been trying to verify his mother's claims by seeking guidance from local clergy. The priest's reaction had probably confirmed what he'd been hoping was some kind of elaborate mistake or misunderstanding. Trevor left the church looking more troubled than when he'd entered. I followed him back to his hotel and watched him purchase a bottle of wine from the lobby shop before disappearing into the elevator. This was my opportunity. Hotel rooms offered privacy and multiple options for staging accidents. A fall in the bathroom, an allergic reaction to something he'd eaten, even a heart attack brought on by stress and alcohol consumption. I gave him 20 minutes to settle in, then made my way to the 3rd floor, using the stairwell to avoid security cameras. Trevor's room was at the end of the hallway, away from other guests who might hear disturbances. I picked the lock with tools that had served me well in similar situations and slipped inside quietly. Trevor was sitting on the bed, the wine bottle open beside him, staring at his mother's letter for what was probably the 1,000th time since receiving it. "Don't move," I said softly, revealing myself, but keeping my hands visible and non-threatening. Trevor looked up without surprise, as if he'd been expecting this moment. "Are you here to kill me?" he asked calmly. "That depends on what you're planning to do with the information in that letter." "I haven't decided yet." I moved closer, noting that Trevor made no attempt to reach for potential weapons or call for help. Either he was remarkably calm under pressure, or he'd already accepted that this confrontation was inevitable. "What did the priest tell you at San Giuseppe?" "That some knowledge is too dangerous for ordinary people to possess." Trevor took a drink directly from the wine bottle. He seemed scared when he read my mother's letter. Smart priest. "So, it's true, then. The man who leads the Catholic Church is really my father." I sat down in the room's only chair, maintaining distance but projecting a non-aggressive posture. "DNA doesn't lie." Trevor nodded slowly. "I keep trying to process what that means. My entire life, I thought my father was some coward who abandoned my mother when things got complicated. Turns out he's actually someone who guides the spiritual lives of over 1 billion people." "How does that make you feel?" "Confused, angry, proud, terrified." He looked at me directly. "And you're here because he's afraid I'll destroy everything he's built. Are you planning to?" Trevor was quiet for a long time, considering the question with obvious seriousness. "Do you know what it's like to discover that your father is probably the most moral man on the planet? He asked finally. My whole life I've been angry at him for leaving. Now I find out he never knew I existed. And he spent the last 32 years trying to make the world a better place. That doesn't answer my question. I came to Rome because I wanted to understand who I am. Learning about my father's identity changes everything I thought I knew about myself and my purpose in life. And what have you concluded? Trevor sat down the wine bottle and folded his mother's letter carefully. I've concluded that some people are called to serve something bigger than their personal desires. My father chose to serve God and humanity instead of having a family. Maybe I'm called to make a similar choice. I felt a chill of recognition. Trevor wasn't planning blackmail or exposure. He was planning sacrifice. What kind of choice? The choice to protect his ability to continue doing good work instead of satisfying my own curiosity about having a relationship with him. Trevor stood and walked to the window overlooking the Roman street below. I've been thinking about all the people who depend on the Catholic Church for guidance, comfort, and hope. If news about my existence destroyed their faith in papal authority, how many of those people would lose something that helps them survive difficult times? You're talking about disappearing. I'm talking about making sure this secret dies with me and never threatens anyone else. The conversation had taken a turn I hadn't anticipated. Trevor wasn't a threat to be eliminated. He was a young man wrestling with the same moral complexities that had driven his father to authorize his death. There might be other solutions, I said carefully. Like what? Living the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering if someday I'll slip up and say something that exposes the truth. Having a relationship with my father that could be discovered and used against him. Pretending this knowledge doesn't exist while trying to build a normal life. Trevor turned back toward me. I've spent 3 days walking around Rome looking at all the art and history and culture that exists because people believe the Catholic Church represented something sacred and worth preserving. How can I be the person who destroys that for millions of people just because I want to meet my dad? I realized then that Trevor had reached the same conclusion as his father, but from the opposite direction. The Pope had chosen the Church over his son. Trevor was choosing to protect the Church over his own desires for family connection. What are you proposing? I'm proposing that Wade Morrison, security consultant, helps Trevor Castellano disappear permanently. New identity, new location, new life where no one will ever connect him to Vatican City or papal parentage. That's not what your father wants. My father wants to protect the Church. This accomplishes that goal without requiring him to have his son's blood on his hands. I studied Trevor's expression, looking for signs of deception or hidden agenda. Instead, I saw the same moral conviction that had driven his father to make an impossible decision. Why should I trust that you won't change your mind later? Relationships end. Jobs disappear. Financial situations change. What happens when you decide you need the leverage this information provides? Because I'm my father's son, Trevor said simply. I inherited his sense of responsibility along with his DNA. I spent the next hour testing Trevor's resolve through hypothetical scenarios and direct challenges. Every response reinforced my assessment that he genuinely intended to sacrifice his own desires to protect the Church and his father's ability to lead it. Finally, I made a decision that would change everything. I'm going to offer you a third option, I said. One that might satisfy both your father's concerns and your desire for some kind of connection. I'm listening. You disappear as you suggested. New identity, new location, new life. But instead of disappearing into anonymity, you disappear into service. What kind of service? The Vatican operates charitable organizations worldwide. Hospitals, schools, disaster relief efforts, programs for refugees, and displaced populations. These organizations always need dedicated people willing to work in difficult conditions for modest compensation. Trevor's eyes lit up with understanding. I could serve the same mission my father serves, just in a different capacity. Exactly, You get to honor your heritage and build a meaningful life. He gets the security of knowing you're protected and occupied with work that aligns with church values. And if circumstances ever change in the future, you'd both have had time to consider options from a position of stability rather than crisis. Would he agree to something like that? Let me find out. I left Trevor in his hotel room and drove directly to Vatican City. Father Benedetto was waiting for me at the same entrance I'd used earlier. How did the meeting with the target proceed? He asked as we walked toward the Pope's private chambers. It proceeded in a way that requires immediate consultation with His Holiness. When I explained Trevor's offer and my alternative proposal, the Pope's reaction was not what I'd expected. He wept. For 5 minutes. The leader of the Catholic Church sat in his chair and cried with the relief of a father who just learned his son was not only alive, but willing to dedicate his life to serving others. You're certain he understands the commitment this would require? He asked finally. He understands that he'd be giving up any possibility of a normal relationship with you, and that his new identity could never be compromised. He also understands that this work would likely take him to some of the most challenging places on earth, and he's willing to accept those conditions. He sees them as a calling rather than a sacrifice. The Pope stood and walked to his window overlooking St. Peter's Square. There is a medical mission in South Sudan that has been requesting additional personnel for months. The work is dangerous. The conditions are primitive. And the need is desperate. Perfect. Trevor would need complete documentation under a new identity. His past as Trevor Castellano would have to be erased entirely. I can arrange that, and there could be no direct contact between us ever. He understands. The Pope turned back toward me. This solution serves everyone's needs while allowing my son to build a life of meaning and service. It's more than I dared hope for when this situation began. We spent another hour working out practical details. The Vatican would arrange for Trevor's new identity and placement with the medical mission. I would handle the logistics of his disappearance from Rome and transition to his new life. His compensation for this assignment would be donated anonymously to support the medical mission's operations. When I returned to Trevor's hotel, I found him packed and ready to leave. What did he say? He asked immediately. He said that serving others is the highest calling any person can embrace regardless of their parentage. Trevor smiled for the first time since I'd met him. When do I start? Tomorrow morning. There's a flight to Nairobi at noon connecting to Juba in the evening. Someone will meet you at the airport with your new documentation and assignment details. What about my life in Phoenix? My job? My apartment? My responsibilities there? W.D. Morrison, security consultant, will handle those arrangements. Trevor Castellano is about to disappear without a trace. That night, I helped Trevor compose and send a final email to his ex-wife's lawyer, explaining that he was relocating internationally for work and providing contact information for a legal firm that would handle his ongoing obligations. By morning, Trevor Castellano had ceased to exist. The man who boarded the flight to Nairobi carried identification for Marcus Sullivan, medical equipment technician, age 32, recently divorced, seeking meaningful work in international humanitarian aid. I watched his plane disappear into the morning sky, then made my own flight arrangements back to the United States. 2 weeks later, I received a brief message through encrypted channels. MS arrived safely and began orientation. Initial reports positive. Patient response to new team member enthusiastic. Weather challenging, but morale high. The message was unsigned, but I knew it came from Vatican intelligence services monitoring their newest humanitarian worker. 6 months later, another message. MS has been recommended for leadership position at second clinic location. Local community has requested his permanent assignment. Requests for additional personnel and supplies have increased significantly since his arrival. I deleted the message and smiled. Trevor had found his calling. The Pope could lead without the constant fear of exposure. And over 1 billion Catholics never had to confront the possibility that their spiritual leader was human enough to have made the same mistakes as anyone else. Sometimes the best solutions require everyone involved to sacrifice something they want in order to protect something more important. The Pope lost the chance to know his son. Trevor lost the chance to know his father. But both gained the satisfaction of serving something larger than their personal desires. In the end, that seemed like a fair trade. I never took another job involving the Vatican. But I occasionally check international news reports from South Sudan. There's a medical clinic there that's been recognized by the World Health Organization for its exceptional patient care and innovative treatment programs. The clinic director is listed as Marcus Sullivan, though no biography is provided. I hope Trevor found the peace and purpose he was looking for. I hope his father sleeps better at night knowing his son is alive and making a difference in the world. And I hope that someday, when circumstances allow, they might find a way to acknowledge each other's existence, even if they can never acknowledge their relationship. Some stories don't end with reunion and reconciliation. Sometimes they end with two people choosing duty over personal happiness and finding meaning in that choice. This was one of those stories. The Pope's commission was completed, but not in the way anyone had expected. Trevor Castiano was dead. Marcus Sullivan was serving humanity in his place. And somewhere in South Sudan, a man who looked exactly like his father was saving lives and never speaking about why that work meant everything to him. It was perhaps the most satisfying ending any of us could have hoped for. Thank you for listening to this entry from the Wilderness Protocol. If you made it through this report and wish to be briefed on future incidents, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel.